information technology is making a great impact in every area of human activity, and in the field of library and information studies and services also the impact is equally strong. Because of this technology, the libraries and information centers the world over have undergone a sea change in terms of their activities and services. To discuss the impact of information technology on the way how the libraries are managed and the services are provided by them, we have with us this afternoon Professor Mairead Brown, Professor of Information Studies in the University of Technology, Sydney, Australia. Mrs. Brown, we would like to know from you how the information technology has made an impact, or what is its influence on the collection development in libraries and also the information policies in terms of collection development.
Well, perhaps I should first of all preface my comments by saying that the incredible growth in publication rate and the also incredible rate of charging for information in the traditional sense, the cost of serials and so on, as well as the volume of them over the last 20 years, there's been an absolutely extraordinary change. And libraries simply haven't been able to keep up either with those costs or with that volume. But fortunately, in some senses, at the same time as this increase has come about, these increases have come about, the technology, the capacity of the technology has given some possible solutions to libraries in how they can actually continue to provide a high level of service and information to their customers. And so in the last 10 to 15 years, but perhaps more in the last 5 years, we've seen a big shift in the philosophy of what libraries are trying to do in terms of how they build their collection of information. Now, there was a time, and it's not so long ago, when a library and a librarian in charge, an information service director, really almost had a dream of being self-sufficient, so that the ideal was that into the library would come a customer, a client, and they'd ask for the information, and in most cases you would expect to have in your collection the material to satisfy that need.
Was it called the situation of just in case?
Indeed, it was a situation where you bought materials, you bought documents, just in case somebody needed them at some time. And a lot of studies were carried out of the major research collections internationally, especially in the United States, and they found an extraordinarily small proportion, in fact, of those library collections that were ever used. They were simply bought and they lay there, but at the same time, of course, were costing a great deal of money both to buy and to maintain. Now, with the technology, new vistas have been opened up. Not only can we access information on the network and through the internet, for example, which is a wonderful source, but we can also find documents and where they're located and have them sent to us through the aid of the technology. So what's happened now is that the concept of a just-in-time library has evolved, whereby you don't aim to have everything just in case a document is required. You aim to get it when the person requires it, and that's the goal that you have in building your collection. So your emphasis has moved in the libraries. The emphasis has moved on owning material, having it there physically in the library, to actually having access to the material regardless of where it's held.
With regard to the response given by the libraries and information centers to these technological developments, it could not be the same with every library in every country.
Indeed,
so, yeah. How do you observe the response of libraries towards absorbing these technologies and utilizing them for improving their efficiency in services and activities?
I think libraries have been very good at using technology, even in the simplest of circumstances. I think we have a long history in libraries of adapting technology. I mean, if you think back into the history of libraries, libraries were among the very early adopters of computers for housekeeping, for cataloging, and for lists and so on. And so we seem to be very flexible in this respect. I think what's happened, certainly in my experience in Australian libraries, and I'm talking about the smallest local library right through to the research libraries and the National Library, is that money that previously was being spent on buying books and serials is now being spent on the technology. So it does have a big effect on how you actually allocate your funds. And the technology is certainly expensive. But when you if you do a sum, if you do a little bit of mathematics, if you work out the cost of buying and holding materials just in case, you find it's actually cheaper to buy materials just in time. So your pattern of expenditure changes. I read a report recently of a very large United States conglomerate of libraries, and this is a scale that I don't understand in a sense, because our Australian libraries are not so big. But one library estimated that it had saved the equivalent of $900,000 in a 2-year period by operating a policy of simply cancelling serials, not all serials, but cancelling the serials, and buying the documents on a 24-hour turnaround from some of the commercial centres which supply. And they added up the difference between what they were spending, and basically they figure they saved $900,000, almost $1 million.
Can it be taken as a simplistic approach like that, because the extent to which a document is used again and again by different readers would also add to the cost factor or the cost benefit analysis?
Yes.
Rather than a particular journal may be used by a few individuals only at a time, whereas a few articles in a couple of journals may be used by several readers again and again. The just-in-time approach may work out much costlier in such a case than the just-in-case approach.
That's absolutely true, and I think that's what libraries are discovering. I mean, there are two factors at work here. One is that the people who are publishing the periodicals, the serials, they don't particularly like the just-in-time process, because it means they're not selling so many serial subscriptions. And they're introducing surcharges, so that if, for example, I want to get a journal article from a particular journal that has a policy of surcharging, it's going to cost a quite substantial amount extra. So if the library is paying for this, it becomes prohibitive. So they really do not want to see this. But the just-in-time concept, just because you have a just-in-time philosophy doesn't mean you don't have a collection development policy. Essentially, you have to take a different approach to collection development, but you must still think through the kinds of uses and the kind of users and readers that you have. Now, in my own institution at the University of Technology, Sydney, we're a new university, and we started with, I have to say, a very poor library collection. And the librarian was very keen to move down the just-in-time avenue. And he was rocketing down there. He was moving very fast. And eventually we said, stop, just a moment. And now we have a policy where the base range of materials. So we do, of course, still have books and materials. I can still go into the library and get the core journals in my area. I can still go into the library and get the core monographs in my area. But anything that's really not to do with the teaching program of the university, that's more esoteric, then it comes in on the just-in-time philosophy.
For taking the approach of just-in-time, good infrastructure, communication infrastructure is required, and the software support. For certain countries which are not well equipped with this infrastructure, for high-speed data transfer, and also in the countries where the foreign exchange is a problem, the just-in-time may be may not be the right approach. What is your reaction to that situation?
Well, I believe that the just-in-time philosophy can work equally well in a country without a highly developed infrastructure. In Australia, we do have good telecommunications infrastructure. We have a very, very large country. It's very, very large with a small population, great distances. But we do have the benefit of a well-developed infrastructure, and so we can go very readily to the United States, for example, for a document. The librarian in my institution can get a document for me on literally 3 or 4 hours turnaround. In a country where you don't have an infrastructure, where it's still in the developmental phase, it seems to me there's no reason whatever that the libraries cannot be more self-sufficient internally, and that they should be able to collaborate and cooperate so that the individual collections in those libraries become, if you like, conceptualized as part of a whole collection. And this is a concept we've had in Australia for some years, and it's got the label, the distributed national collection, so that our national library is not a great big imposing national library with every subject under the sun, but the National Library maintains the Union Catalogue, so that it is the central point, it's the place you go to for the information about the location, but then you don't get the document from there. You get it from a local library, perhaps, someone in your locality. And I think, the Postal Service enables you to operate a just-in-time, it seems to me, just as readily as does, sending data down a high-speed line. So I think it has validity.
Such an approach requires also another requirement of the libraries responding very fast.
Yes.
And they must be having the minimum infrastructure for providing document copy within, say, a reasonable time of 24 hours or 48 hours. Yes. This just-in-time approach may work very well in large cities or in medium-sized cities which have reasonably good infrastructure. For remotely placed libraries or remotely placed users, even this would be difficult because they have to have an online access to the central database which is available in the National Library. If that is also not available, perhaps it would be not practical to have just-in-time.
But in those isolated areas, it's also unrealistic to have a just-in-case library. I think you're unlikely to have the capacity and the resources. Maybe it's different in this country, but in our rural and remote areas, it tends to be that they are smaller libraries, and the idea of them being self-contained is simply not feasible. There are some interesting developments in terms of how users react to the just-in-time. We've had considerable controversy. The National Library of Australia has moved to be, in some respects, in some aspects of its services, has moved to be a just-in-time. But many of the users don't like this. They have a picture, a vision, an expectation that they can walk into this library and have all their needs met. Now, the reality is, it's very interesting. Just before I left to come here, I saw a very interesting study which has been done in Australia. The reality is that when you look at the patterns of interlibrary loan that exist in Australia, the bigger the library, the more interlibrary loans they get. So no library is self-sufficient. But the users perceive that there is a self-sufficiency, and they get very nervous about the idea that they cannot walk in and expect to get that document straight away.
In India, there are good libraries located in metropolitan cities, and there are good libraries in certain universities which are somewhat away from the metropolitan cities with good collections. And there are attempts being made from the government side to network all the Delhi university library system in the country. And also metropolitan libraries networks are coming up in Delhi, Madras and other places to have resource sharing among themselves. So the infrastructure necessary for that arrangement is building up slowly. In such a situation, what sort of arrangement would you suggest for the Indian students and library users to have a quick access to information and have quick document delivery system?
Well, there's no easy answer, obviously, but it seems to me that the key to operating a just-in-time kind of philosophy, although, as I said earlier, it's probably going to be a hybrid. You know, you're going to have, in certain aspects of your service, there'll be a core of collection. It'll be a just-in-case idea. But it seems to me that we have to become very flexible in how we think, very flexible in how we do our business. And sometimes it's very hard if we've been used to doing things a certain way. I mean, let me give you an example. Again, just speaking of my own situation, when I wanted to order books for my students, I would order those books from the library, and an order would be placed with the bookseller, and eventually that would come through. Meanwhile, the term has begun, the classes have begun, no books. And yet I know that that book is available in a bookshop, several bookshops. But because we've ordered a certain way, well, that's traditionally the way we've done things. Now we've persuaded, or I won't say we've persuaded, it's the librarians themselves have come up with the idea. They have now been issued with a credit card. And so they have a credit card. They go, if you tell them it's in this bookshop, they will go to the bookshop and get it for you. Of course, this would not be done with every item because it's more expensive, as you know, to buy there's no discount if you buy over the counter. But it's that flexibility. Now, I don't know what similar schemes you might have in this area here, but I think that we have to put aside some of our library procedures and maybe look at how business does things. How does a business move documents or move items around? You know, what kind of delivery services have they got?
In India, the library science students mostly depend on library collections because books are very expensive, even journals are very expensive, which is normally beyond the reach of the means of the students, even teachers. In such a situation, unless there is an effective document delivery service at the university level or educational institutions level, students would not be able to get good benefit out of the system. May not get themselves equipped well during the course period. What would be the implications of the electronic information transfer for remotely placed in library science schools, which would otherwise get benefit if they happen to be in the big cities, where communication infrastructure is much better.
So you're talking about students who are in remote locations, yes, so to speak, away. We have this problem in Australia too because of the geography. We have students who live thousands of miles away from the nearest town and the nearest library. And basically they rely on two kinds of sources. Well, we have, like you have, Open University, broadcast media and so on, but we basically use the postal service. Now sometimes, and this is something that I found very novel when I went to Australia, the postal service sometimes comes in on an airplane. So people are living in remote stations, as they're called, and farms, and their mail comes in on a small airplane, and they get a drop of mail every 2-3 months. And there's communication over the radio back to the base where the student is enrolled. So I think clearly the internet is going to cut across this in due course when students and individuals out in communities have access to internet and go via satellite to communication centers. I think that will also provide a way forward. I guess when CD-ROMs become yes, easier to produce, then we will have those CD-ROMs available. And a CD-ROM, as you know, is not expensive it's expensive to produce, but not expensive to duplicate. And I think that people will have personal computers in their homes and will have those CD-ROMs to back up the other more traditional mechanisms.
It is clear that in the context of information technology arriving into libraries in a big way, the libraries have to have a modified collection development policy that suits the individual libraries. to the extent of their use or planned use of information technology. Librarians and library professionals have to play an increasingly important role in planning the infrastructure development of the institutions also for optimum utilization of those resources for providing very efficient information services. In a situation where say these technologies are not adequately available, efforts should be made by the library professionals to keep an eye on the incoming technologies into a country and then make best efforts to get them and make use of them for operating more and more efficient services. We thank you, Professor Brown, for your excellent ideas and for sharing your ideas with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.